Yep, we see it. Okay. All right. So thanks for joining everybody, joining us today. We have the migration engineering team on today to talk about migrating applications between Kubernetes clusters. If you want to go to the next slide, Marco. I just quickly before Marco takes over and runs through this. You want to go? There you go. I just want to let you guys know. So for anybody who is new or hasn't been on one of these calls before, I put a link in the chat as well. We are trying to catalyze a community around migration tools and practitioners and best practices upstream. So you'll notice the link I put in the chat. If you click there, there's links to a GitHub organization that has a number of repositories where you can find these tools upstream. Over time, our goal is to start having more upstream releases of these tools, and also in the meantime to grow the community. So feel free to go to that site, click on meetups if you want to see future meetups. If you want to be invited to these talks in the future, right now we're inviting OpenShift SME to some of these, but in the future we're going to stop doing that and just be on the Conveyor mailing list. So if you want to get future invites, please click on forum on the site and click the join button, and then you'll be on the list. What else? We've got a Slack channel on the Kubernetes Slack that you could also catch us on #conveyor or #conveyor, depending on how old or young you are, if it's a pound or a hashtag. And you could find us there, and then we'd love to get your engagement. So with that, I'll hand it over to Marco and let the team take it away.
Yeah, and I'll go back to this slide for 1 second. So a big part of this presentation today is going to be around the demos of like we have 2 demos, one about how to install the tool and another one about how to run the tool. So and that's going to be done from our engineering team. So John, I don't know if are you doing the demos or is it Eric? I think Eric prepared the demos, but who's running them?
Eric will be the one that's doing the demos. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, so we have 2 guys from engineering that will give us some demos at the end. But first, let's talk a little bit about Conveyor, the upstream project, and the migration toolkit from containers, which is, or MTC for short, which is the product we're going to talk about. So first of all, like from a Conveyor initiative point of view, as James pointed out, like it's actually multiple projects that are up there. And some of them have a downstream equivalent. So as everything we do at Red Hat, right, we work upstream, and then once we're ready, we finalize it, and then we release something downstream. But there's also some other projects that right now are just upstream, like Move to Kube would be a good example. And there's more to come. But all the teams around those projects are around migration. So MIG operator, which will be MTC later, actually is the one that actually we're going to talk about today, but there's also one around the migration of virtual machines, migration of applications, which will become MTA. So, but it's always the same model, right? So there's like in the case of MIG, there's actually multiple upstream projects that are getting integrated together upstream in the Conveyor MIG operator GitHub repo. And there's also even inside that repo, there's also some other repo for like the UI and the controllers. All those things are getting integrated together, including the additional upstream projects that are actually on other places on the web. So like Velero, which is a well-known Kubernetes project to do backup and restore Kubernetes objects. There's Restic as well, that is known for backing up file systems. And there's more to come, right? And so we integrate all that together, and then we do all the development upstream. And then at some point, you know, we release it as an operator inside OpenShift, which will at that point become MTC, or Migration Toolkit for Containers. So I already talked about those 2 projects. So Velero is the well-known one that has been used by a lot of people to back up and restore Kubernetes objects. So this is a big part of what MTC is, but on top of it, obviously we added like some better PV integration, a UI, and an integration with OpenShift to help our customers. In this case, the reason why we started this was to help our customers migrate from OpenShift 3 to OpenShift 4, but it can also be used from any Kubernetes or any OpenShift to OpenShift migration. And outside of the bits and the work we do there, we also try to have some best practices in an open source fashion also up there. So In this repo that you're going to see there, if you would go to that link, you would get a best practices guide that it's all upstream. That is mostly based on the lesson learned from a bunch of migration that we've done with customers. So we have identified, right now we have 5 different steps that we have identified that most customers are following when they are using that tool to migrate from 3 to 4, which is the planning, doing some health check, some pre-migration testing, then doing the migration at scale, and finally some troubleshooting. So, and for us, like, this is still work in progress, and this is upstream. So anybody obviously is welcome to contribute to that and to share their thoughts about the best practices of migrating applications from 3 to 4, but also from any Kubernetes or any OpenShift to any other OpenShift, like while migrating apps. Like if you feel something is missing in that guide, like feel free to file PRs. And James, I don't know if you want to talk about even like the what you have in place right now for those that are contributing. Do you want to describe it a little bit?
Yeah, so up until November, I think 6th is when it is, the leading contributors to the best practices guide by pull requests and lines of code will, the top contributor will receive 500 points, I believe it is. Second is 250, and then down the list. So if you want to win some Red Hat rewards, feel free to send your PRs. And don't just delete empty lines. We'll find you. Thanks.
So please, yeah, feel free to contribute, and that's helping us out. And at the same time, you can win some reward points. So this is the architecture of MTC. So how this works behind the scene, obviously, when you can install this as an operator inside OpenShift. You get a UI that is the blue box here, but typically that blue box, that UI, that API front end would typically be installed on the target cluster, so on your OCP4 cluster. But in the background, Velero is getting installed on both clusters. And you need also some object storage that will be used, because actually what Velero does is it's a backup and a restore. So it's backing up all your Kubernetes objects and your PVs and your internal images to some object storage repository in the middle, and then restoring that on the destination side. So actually there's work right now going on, like we just had a sprint review this morning where engineering actually showed a way to actually increase the speed of the migration by bypassing the backup and restore, and by streamlining and using rsync to actually copy directly the data from source to destination. So this could be another way in the future that will be added to our product to help actually streamline or increase the performance of the migration and avoid that backup in the middle. For some objects, but this is all like coming later. For now, like Velero is doing a full backup on that object storage and then restoring it on the destination side. And there's different ways of copying the PVs. So there's the Restic way, which is a file system copy. So Restic is the default option that works pretty much for everything. It's doing a full backup of your file system and restoring it on the destination side. So that makes it compatible with any kind of storage backend, as we're looking at the file system inside that PV, and that's what we're copying and restoring on the other side. But as well, Velero has some storage plugins. When you're using OpenShift in the cloud, then we can leverage those plugins to copy the data using snapshots from the cloud providers. And finally, we have an option that we call Move or Swing the PV, which is the typical use case for that is if you have an NFS backend that can be shared with the source and the destination, then we can just unattach the PV on the source side and reattaching it on the destination side. So this is much quicker when you need to move the PVs, as we don't have to copy any data. We're just reattaching the NFS endpoint. But the downside of it is if you have to roll back for any kind of reason, then you would have to reattach that PV on the source side. When in the other cases, we're not affecting the source at all, like we're just copying the data. So if anything goes wrong, it's pretty easy to roll back, as we haven't affected the source side during the migration process. And if you're copying the data using Restic as an example, then you can stage your migration first. So what stage does is copying as much of the data as possible, will not flip the switch at the end. So that can be done during business hour, where Restic will copy all the data from source to destination, but will not finalize the migration. And then at the end, during your maintenance window, you can click the migrate button, and that would just copy the delta of the last time you've done a stage, and then quiesce your app on the source side, scale it down to 0, and restart the app on the destination side. The thing that the tool is not using, it is not doing for you is the network side of this. So there's still a need to actually flip your DNS or change your load balancer configuration to point your traffic now to the destination side once you've done the migration. That all said, this can all be automated with something that we call migration hooks, which is a way to add automation to your process. So we've done a demo actually that is on the OpenShift blog, where with F5 we created like some scripts that actually call the load balancer and change the network side automatically for you when you're migrating your apps from one source to destination cluster. From a roadmap point of view, on the downstream side, we just rebranded. So maybe MTC, you've heard of CAM before. So that was the previous name. We actually rebranded all the migration tools that are coming out of conveyors on the downstream side as migration toolkit for something. So migration toolkit for containers, migration toolkit for virtual machine, migration toolkit for application. So this is why CAM got rebranded MTC to align to the migration toolkit brand. As well as we have added a way to better see what's inside your namespace before you're migrating them. So this is the feedback we got from some customers and end users, that sometimes like it would be beneficial to have a way to drill down into your namespace before migrating them, because that would indicate why sometimes some are slow to migrate. Like if you have like a huge amount of PVs and objects that are getting copied. So instead of having to go dig into that by yourself, then you can see everything now directly from the UI, as well as a way to debug or to better see what's going on behind the scenes. So obviously the tool will give you some output when something goes wrong or on the status of your migration, but sometimes you might want to drill down for troubleshooting purposes on what's happening in the Velero layer or at the Restic layer. So we're provided better way to get to that information directly from the UI, and also a way to copy paste the command like the OCGet that you could run to actually go drill down in the background if you needed to. And the best practices guide I already talked about. That's something we just released as a first version of it with 1.3, but this is still work in progress that we're hoping will get better over time as we're learning more from additional migrations. In 1.4 coming at the end of the year, I talked about like the direct migration mechanism using rsync. So this is what we're talking about here. So the engineering team is actually finalizing that work right now. We're hoping to have this ready at the end of the year in MTC 1.4. So this would accelerate your migration if you have a large amount of data that needs to be copied, as in this case, we would only copy it once instead of having to copy it twice. So so this will be beneficial for people that have large amount of data that needs to be copied from source to destination, as well as still improving like how we report back in the UI on the progress and the error reporting and actually like how much data. Like right now, there's sometimes a little bit of a lack of transparency during the migration process on exactly what's going on in the background. So we're trying to improve that by having like at the Velero layer as an example, and all the other layers, like to report back to the UI in a better way to give you full transparency exactly of what's happening during the migration. One thing that I should have maybe said before is like right now the tool to run MTC, you need to be a cluster admin to be able to migrate applications. So this is something we know is an issue for some people. They would like to outsource the migration of their applications to the end users or to the app owners or the developers. So this is something we're working on, but it's more a long-term thing, as there's some things that needs to be changed actually on the Velero side, and so there's also some additional upstream work that needs to be done and bring back all the way to MTC at the end. So this is taking a little bit longer, but we're hoping to have that sometime later next year in 2021 to allow end users to not have to be cluster admin to actually migrate their apps from one OpenShift to another one. So Eric, do you want to take over this and go through your demos? Any questions maybe? Yeah.
Just before, since there's 148 people on, you might not want to answer questions live right now.
Yeah,
but what I would ask is if you do have questions, please keep them running in the chat. And second, while Eric's getting ready to kind of share his screen and start doing the demo here, if you could please take a minute and click on the polls. It's the little square, triangle, and circle in the top of your screen. And if you click on that and you click on polls, there's 3 polls in there, just kind of before you even saw this, how much did you know about Migration Toolkit for Containers, or how experienced you are in it? The second one is around network connectivity inside of between source and destination clusters, and the third is where your customer is on their OpenShift 4 journey. If you all would mind, if you have a second to go in there and just answer those 3 quick things on a poll basis, I think it might be interesting to see from the group where those land. So thanks, Marco. Yeah, I guess, Eric, over to you.
Thanks, James. I'm going to share my screen if you can just let me know that you can see it. Okay, I've got the video up here.
Yeah,
Yep.
we can see it, Eric. All good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Nelson. I'm an engineer on MTC. We've been working on this project for like about 1.5 years now, I think. I work with John Matthews, who's also in the chat answering some questions. And I have a couple demos today. I recorded these videos and I uploaded them to our YouTube channel, to the Conveyor channel, actually. We're continuing to, right now there's only 2 videos as a kind of getting started, but we're hoping to cover a bunch of the topics and continue to add overviews of features as we release them to that channel. So we'll hopefully start to build a kind of a library of content that covers the tool and best practices around using it. So the first video I've got today is an installation and configuration of the tool. It's a little more in depth than you would typically see with like a single operator that you install via OLM on 4, for example, because you've got multiple sides and you have to contend with OCP3, which doesn't have OLM installed in it. If you're, it actually has OLM, but it's a tech preview. And then the second video I've got is covering just kind of an example migration of an application. I think some folks probably have seen it's the SockShop application. So it's a little more sophisticated than like a Hello World with a deployment and a route. It's got a lot of services and stuff in it, and it's also stateful, so it's got a number of PVs. So we'll go through that in the second video. So I'm just going to kick things off here. You'll see 2 terminal panes here. The top one is my OCP4 cluster, and the bottom one is my OCP3 cluster. So they're both pretty vanilla. My 3 cluster just has a workload on it that I want to move to my 4 cluster. And on the 4 side, I don't have anything installed in it. So I'm going to start here. Just list the cluster coordinates here. So up top, you can see I've got a 4 cluster. This is a 4515 cluster. And then on the bottom, I've got a 311 cluster. And that's running my workload that I want to migrate. So I'm going to get the routes to my 4 cluster so I can pop open the console. What I want to do here is install CAM. I'm sorry, I'm still getting used to MTC. Install MTC in my OpenShift 4 cluster. So the recommended way to do that is via the OLM console. If you've used that previously, we're available in the operator hub. So I'm just going to accept the self-signed certificates here and log in with my KubeAdmin account. As it's loading, this is the new OpenShift 4 console. And under the operator pane, I'm going to come in and search for Migration Toolkit for containers. I don't already have the namespace set up where I want to install this, but fortunately OLM introduced a feature that will automatically create it. So there's a couple release channels that we have. There's a release 1.2 and a 1.3 channel. 1.3 is what we would recommend you would use, and then select the recommended namespace as OpenShift migration, and you can go ahead and install that. So the operator is getting installed here. And if I switch to the project, which didn't exist previously, OLM created this, and you can see it's pulling down the operator image for me and installing that. So this looks a lot like a traditional operator installation on a OpenShift 4 cluster. The interesting part kind of comes in once you've got stuff set up and you need to register your clusters so that our controller is aware of them and can talk to them. So here are all of our API objects. These are the CRDs that make up MTC. So the migration controller CRD is the one that the operator is going to be looking for configuration details. So I'm just going to pause the video real quick here. You can think of MTC as 3 distinct components. There's a UI component, a controller component, and Velero, which includes Restic actually. So between the controller and Velero, basically you're going to install the controller in one of your clusters. Typically, as Marco mentioned, that's going to be your 4 cluster, so your target side. In addition to that, you do need Velero on all of your clusters that you're migrating to and from, because Velero is what the controller actually interfaces with to orchestrate a backup and restore that composes your migration. And then finally, you've got your UI, which really you're only going to put in one place as well. So The language that I've taken to using to describe the two types of installations that you can have is when you have all three of those components installed, I've called that the control cluster, and often that's your OpenShift 4 cluster where you're migrating to. And then separately for your 3 clusters, really all we need is Velero. And I say a 3 cluster, but again, it doesn't have to be a 3 cluster because the controller is going to communicate with that cluster and create Velero CRs to orchestrate the backup and restore process that composes a migration to your 4 cluster. And finally, your UI, you really only need in one place, and it makes sense to put that alongside the controller. So looking at this CR, you can see you can actually switch these on and off. You most likely want to accept these defaults unless you have a specific reason otherwise to choose a different value. We have some other configuration data like PV limits and REST timeouts and stuff like that, but typically you can just accept the defaults here. And you can also, if you're interested, you can dig into our operator that's on GitHub and all the configuration vectors that are available. Basically anything that our operator is an Ansible operator. So if you dig into the default role, if you're familiar with Ansible, you'll find all of those configuration values, and those can be accepted via that CR. So we created the migration CR here, migration controller CR here, and the operator picked that up, and now it's setting up RESTIC on all of the nodes, as well as Velero, and it's spawning our UI and our controller as well. So if I get those pods, you can see it's creating it on the 4 side. So now I'm actually covering, the video is a little sped up here because it's pulling images, but the this is another interesting part of an overall MTC installation. So I have my operator and I have MTC installed on the 4 side. On the 3 side, because OLM is not present, we need to pull a couple files off of the images. So we effectively distribute our installation files as an operator manifest that is composed of all of the objects that make up the installation that OLM kind of sets up on the 4 side. So ultimately, we boiled it down to a single file that you can run an OC create on. And in addition to that, we have a controller, an example migration controller CR that you can go and create with the sensible defaults for a source cluster installation. And the way that we distribute those is via these images. So what I'm doing here is just pulling the MTC 131 image to my workstation, and that'll quickly download. And then what I want to do is run a docker cp command, and that'll copy that file out of the image along with the controller file. So I have those in my history. I'm just going to grab those and make sure that these paths line up. You can find all these the installation instructions and everything in the OCP documentation. This is all documented in case you can't quite make this out. So I'm going to pull the controller 3 file off of here. So now I have these 2 files, and I'm just going to cat the controller 3 file. You can see actually in this one I have the controller switched off as well as the UI because all I need is the Velero installation on my 3 side. And then just taking a quick look at the operator YAML. This is the manifest. There's role bindings, service accounts, all the CRDs, permissions, everything that you would need in order to set it up. What we just saw there are all of the specifications for the operands that the operator is installing. So that's Velero, RESTIC, all that good stuff. And we have those all baked in here as SHAs. The SHAs are required for a disconnected installation. So I've logged into my 3 side here. So this is, I'm creating the operator manifest file. You can see all my objects getting created. Now if I look for the pods, you'll see the operator coming up. Once that's up, then I'm going to create my controller 3 file. That's the migration controller CR, and the operator should be spawning all of my all the pods that make up an OpenShift 3 installation. So that's going to be Velero plus RESTIC on all of my nodes. Now I'm running a get pods on my 4 side. And I'm going to get the routes because alongside the UI, you'll have a route for our migration console, and that's our UI. And on the bottom, you can see all the RESTIC pods coming up on each of my 3 nodes. So let's navigate to the migration console now. I have everything installed. I have the operator. I have MTC installed in my clusters. So now comes the configuration part of this. So here I have to go through and accept the certificates again. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can either just follow these prompts and accept some. This is assuming you're using self-signed certificates. Obviously, a lot of people have their cert infrastructure set up. The second way that you can do this is actually set up your browser to trust your self-signed certificates. That's possibly the easiest way to do it. So now, I'm gonna pause the video real quick here. There's 3 major pieces that make up our data model in MTC. So obviously, the first thing you need to add is you need to tell MTC, or the target side, the control cluster, where's your source cluster that you want to move things off of. So I'm going to register my 3 cluster now. So this is the configuration component of that. First thing I need to go get is the coordinates to my API server that's on my 3 side. So I'm going to pass that URL here, and then the next thing I need is a service account token. So the operator sets up a service account token and permissions that with our specific roles that we require. So I'm running a get token command that's going to dump that service account token into my clipboard, and then I drop that in there. That gets created into a secret and is referenced on the CR so that our controller can access it. So I'm adding that cluster, and I can confirm that the connection was successful. That's the controller actually telling me it can talk to the cluster. So now I've got connectivity between my host cluster, which is the 4 side, and my 3 side. And the next piece that I need to set up is my replication repository, which is going to act as my intermediary storage. And typically that's object storage. So you can use a couple different types, AWS S3, S3. I'll just pause real quick. We get this question a lot. So people see AWS S3 and they ask, well, what do I do if I'm in a disconnected environment or I don't have access to cloud storage? So you can run S3 storage out of Nuba. I forget what it's actually called downstream, but it's part of OCS. So we do support running your own storage on your target side, for example.
Yeah.
MCG, thank you. So I have the S3 bucket name. Here I'm just using AWS. And then selecting the region, and I clipped out my keys, but I added in my keys there. And so it's going to create a little chunk of data inside of my S3 bucket to confirm that my controller can actually communicate with the S3 bucket as well. So at this point, I've installed MTC on all my clusters, and I've configured my clusters such that my controller is able to actually talk to my source side. And I've created my replication repository and registered my intermediary storage. So that kind of completes the initial installation and configuration. And then I'm ready to move on to my next video, which is what am I moving over? And that's done by creating a migration plan. So we'll dig into that in a sec, but I'll just pause here in case there's any questions. Or maybe, Marco, do you think that we should just continue and we can answer questions afterwards?
Yeah, keep
Whatever
going.
you think is best.
I think questions are best on chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask on chat and we'll answer. But yeah, keep going with the demo. We have 145 people, so it will be easier on chat to answer questions.
We'll go through that. Okay, so starting the next video. Okay, so I'm in the sock shop namespace, and that's where my test workload is deployed in the source cluster. And as you can see, there's a decent amount that makes this application up, which is why we kind of like to use it, because it's a little bit bigger than a toy application. But it's got this front end that's living at a route in my 3 side. So it's like a stateful web application that's got a shopping cart and all sorts of like messaging buses and services and databases running behind it. It's actually got 4 different PVs that it uses as well. So I've got my 2 clusters registered, and I've got my replication repository, which is my S3 bucket. So now it's time to tell MTC, what do I actually want to migrate? So that's done by creating a migration plan by our wizard. So I'll come in and give the plan a name, and then I'm going to select the source and the target cluster here. So this is when my clusters actually get a designation as a source or a target. And then I'm going to select my intermediary repository, which is the only one that I've registered. So the next thing that it does is it goes out, the controller goes out and communicates with my source cluster that I designated to query for the namespaces that are available to migrate. I don't know if this was covered in the first part or not, I can't remember, but so our atomic unit of migration is a namespace. Velero supports getting more granular than that, so you can actually black and white list specific objects, but MTC operates at the namespace level. So you can migrate sets of namespaces that make up migration on a single plan, but the namespace is as granular as you're going to get. So you can see I've got a bunch of stuff in my source cluster here, but I'm going to go ahead and select sock shop. And it had some stats about what I'm moving over. So the controller's going out and querying that namespace and looking for the PVCs that are actually in use. So it came back to me and it found 4 PVCs. And as we covered earlier in the presentation, we've got a few different ways that you can migrate your data to your target. I was careful not to say move, because move is the swing of that PV. So that's the disconnect and reconnect on the target side. For this example, I'm going to use copy. So that's a copy of the data. There's a couple different variants of copy. We support snapshots. So that's going to use the native APIs to snapshot a disk. But that's really only available under certain specific scenarios. So we're going to fall back to using RESTIC, which is almost like an rsync into the intermediary repository and then out of the intermediary and into the target. But that actually is the most flexible. So that's going to let us switch. And in this case, I'm actually going from an EVS volume to my Ceph volumes on the target side. So we can swap out this target storage class for each of these volumes as I see fit. I've got a few that are available to me on the target, but I'm just going to select these Ceph volumes, and then here's where you can designate them as a file system copy or a snapshot. We don't cover this in this video, but this is another feature that I would love to cover in a specific video on our YouTube channel. You can define hooks that's kind of arbitrary code that's executed inside of a container at various steps within the migration process. So this is really cool because it allows you to, we generally support Ansible out of the box, but it's really just an entry point. So if you create your own image, you can have it do whatever you'd like. And you can do interesting things like manipulating, let's say, a load balancer as part of your migration process with this. So I'll leave that as a teaser for a future video. So here it's going to go through a series of validations. Our controller does a lot of validations. We're continuing to hone that. And this is another feature that Marco mentioned. So here's where we can actually dig into the namespaces that I selected, and I can see exactly what's going to be migrated. We found that a lot of customers actually kind of don't know what they're actually doing. So they may have an expectation that it's going to be very quick when in reality they have 30,000 Kubernetes resources that they're moving over and they're not aware of it. Or they've got a ton of images that they haven't been pruning. So this should actually inform you of the 3 buckets of things that you're typically moving, which are K8s, resources, PV, state, and images. This will give you a better picture of what we've identified as you having selected to move as part of your migration. So this has 119 Kubernetes resources. There's 4 PVCs. They've got a capacity of 40 gigs, so that doesn't necessarily mean that there's actually 40 gigs of data, but that's the maximum. We've seen some strange edge cases around that too that I can dig into. But and there are no custom images that make this up, so it's all coming out of an external registry. So there's a stage and a migrate here. Marco was covering the ability to preload your data onto your target without quiescing your source application in an effort to minimize your downtime so that you can stage it all and then quiesce your application and just grab that final delta of any data that's been written between when you last staged it and when you're doing your current migration. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to go ahead and migrate it. And then here I have an opportunity to actually tell it. We quiesce the application on your source side during a migration, and what that means in reality is a scale to 0. You have an opportunity here to say, hey, actually, I don't need to do that, so you can keep up my source application or not. I'm gonna leave that the default, which is to quiesce my source application. So I'm kicking off the migration here, and this is the status reporting. We're expecting a pretty significant improvement here with our next minor release, which is 1.4.0. So if I dig into this menu, this is another feature that was added with 1.3.0. This is the tree of objects that actually make up a migration that the controller is creating and orchestrating and watching. So I'm looking at a Velero backup right here, and this is where you can see on the status, it's giving me some progress information, and that's where the information in the progress bar that we saw in the UI is derived from. That can be really handy because in previous iterations of this, there's kind of the tree of objects that makes up a migration is pretty complex, and you'd have to, in order to crawl it, you had to follow a bunch of breadcrumbs. That's really convenient to pull it all into the same place. So popping out to the console on the 3 side, you can see that the application has been quiesced, and we've launched some stage pods to mount the PVs so that we can grab the data off of them and copy them into the intermediary storage and then over to the target side. So right now the controller is waiting to confirm that the source application has been quiesced, so it doesn't try to move data over that's still being written to. And now it's started to create these Velero backup objects to pull the data over. So here are the stage pods, one for each of my PVs that I'm moving, migrating. And on the target side, I didn't have a SockShop app yet. So I'm refreshing the source route now, and you can see that's the router view that shows when there's no backing application that's responding. And then I'm refreshing the debug view, and you can see that some more backups are being created. And now it's actually moving over my underlying data. At first, it was getting the Kubernetes objects, and now it's getting the PVs. Now it's entered into a phase where it's confirming that the backup has been created, has been replicated on the target side. I'll jump ahead real quick. And it's creating a restore. So those are the core Velero objects, backups and restores. So you can see I've got a couple that are left over from previous ones, but I've got a restore that's been created by my controller. And I now have a SockShop namespace on my target side. So I'm going to set that as my active project and then just dump the PVCs. So you can see that the PVCs have been created, one for each of the source ones. And in fact, they were also using the Ceph storage class. So I've gone from EBS to Ceph at this point. And now I've got stage pods that have been created on my target side. Those are mounting those PVs, and then we're grabbing the data and using those to install the data into the PVCs that were created. That finished, and now it's terminating our stage pods on the target side. And a final restore is being created that's going to recreate all of the deployments that make up my workload. So here are the deployments. And then finally, we'll just watch the pods come up. So all the images are being downloaded and the containers being created and volumes being mounted. I'll just jump ahead real quick. And now I'm getting my routes on the target side. So we created a route on my OpenShift 4 cluster, and if I navigate to that, we see the SockShop. So that pretty much composes, well, that finishes my demo. Those are the 2 videos that we have recorded and posted to the YouTube channel. Like I said, we're going to continue to be capturing kind of getting started topics as well as deeper dives into the features as we release them. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, so just before we go to Q&A, I know we had a couple of questions. If you want, you could use the Q&A function again by clicking on square, triangle, circle icon and clicking on Q&A. I know we have one question in there now. Before we do that, I just want to let you all know I pasted a session survey in there. If you want, I think the first 25 people to fill out the survey, if you put your address in there, we will send you a Conveyor community shirt, which is totally awesome and really cool. Yeah, so if you could click on the session survey, provide your feedback. Oh, it's no longer accepting responses. Oh, shoot. Hold on. Let me open it up. It should be working now. Try it again. If you refresh, it'll open back up. It's not that I don't want to send anybody t-shirts, I promise. So it's now open. If you go through, put your information in there. I think as many shirts as we have, we'll try and ship them out to people. And I think we said we're going to limit to the first 25. Really appreciate it. With that, I'll kick it over to maybe Marco and Eric. The first question on Q&A, and even John, if you want to jump in, or Matt, is my customer has hundreds of projects to migrate, requiring cluster admin rights is going to be a big bottleneck for them. Any plans to change this or ways to mitigate it?
Yeah, so we are aware of it, and we're working on having this capability as soon as possible. It's just taking a little bit longer than expected because of all the upstream work that we need to get done. But we should have this in 2021. We just don't know yet exactly around when. Hoping as soon as possible. In the meantime, if that's really a big issue, like just reach out to me directly, and we'll figure it out. We'll look at the exact use case with the engineering team and see if there's anything creative we could do for them. But that's the best answer I have for now, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think John pasted the link to the adding multi-tenancy to Velero.
Yeah, that's one of the key thing, right? Because one of the issue we have is as soon as you outsource this to multiple people inside an organization, then right now all the migration are sequential, so they cannot be run at the same time, which is one of the key thing we need actually as a core functionality for non-admin, is the ability to run multiple migrations in parallel.
Great. We got one more question. Anurag asked, my customer has all stateless apps. Will this app be of any use to my customer?
Yeah, for sure. At the same time, like obviously, like if you can reprovision from pipeline to another cluster, and that tend to be more the case when it's stateless, it's even better, right? Actually, most cases, customers that are using that application to migrate their apps, it's because they have state, and that's what they want to migrate from one cluster to another. If you don't have any state at all, then you can usually reprovision from pipeline to another cluster without too much of an issue. That all said, if for another reason that we haven't think about, they cannot reprovision from pipeline, then yes, definitely they can use the app even if it's completely stateless. It's going to be just even easier and faster to do it, as you don't have to copy any data.
Great. All right. Any last questions? I appreciate you all filling out the polls. I think you could see some of the results on the knowledge of MTC and network connectivity. If there's no other questions, really appreciate you all taking your time. I know this is lunchtime and it's also late in EMEA. We will post the recording on the Meetup page at conveyor.io/meetups, I believe it is. And that should be available with the slides as well here in a couple of hours, and we'll send it out to the mailing list. So thanks, Marco, Eric, and others who presented today.
Great demo, Eric. That was awesome. Thanks for putting all that together.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.